The day my aunt told me my grandmother never loved me, I believed her. I was standing in the hallway of the house, where I grew up, holding a box of photographs. And she said it so casually, like she was commenting on the weather. Your grandmother always thought you were a disappointment, sweetheart. She just never had the heart to tell you. I didn't know then that she'd already taken everything my grandmother left me, had been slowly erased from my life by someone who shared her blood. I didn't know that the woman who raised me to believe in family. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My grandmother died on a Tuesday morning in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the air had that crisp quality that makes you think about all the seasons you've lived through. I was at work when my aunt called, not my mother. My aunt. That should have been the first sign something was wrong. Carolyn, she said, and her voice had this tremor in it. This practiced grief that I later learned to recognize. I'm so sorry to tell you this, but Mom passed away this morning. Peacefully, in her sleep. I remember the way my knees went weak, how I had to sit down, right there in the middle of the office break room. My grandmother wasn't just my grandmother. She was my person. When my parents divorced and my mother spiraled into her own darkness, my grandmother was the one who held me together. She taught me to bake bread on Sunday mornings. She taught me that crying wasn't weakness. She taught me that family could be chosen as much as inherited. I drove to her house, still wearing my work clothes, mascara running down my face, hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I got there, my aunt's car was already in the driveway. So was my uncle's. So was my cousin's. The whole family had descended, like vultures, I thought, and then immediately felt guilty for thinking it. My aunt opened the door before I could even knock. She pulled me into a hug that felt more like a restraint. Oh, Carolyn, she whispered into my hair. We're all devastated. But we have to be strong now. We have so much to do. I should mention that my aunt, Patricia, had always been complicated. She was my grandmother's youngest daughter, the one who never quite grew up, the one who always needed just a little more help than everyone else. My grandmother used to say that Patricia had a good heart, but bad judgment. I used to think that was generous. I don't anymore. The house felt wrong without my grandmother in it, empty. Like someone had removed the one thing that made it home. Everyone was gathered in the living room, drinking coffee from my grandmother's china, talking in hushed voices about funeral arrangements. My mother sat in the corner, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. And when our eyes met, I saw something break in her face. We held each other for a long time. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? The funeral happened fast. Too fast, I realized later. My aunt handled everything, made all the decisions, chose the casket, wrote the obituary, selected the flowers. At the time, I was grateful. I was drowning in grief. And it felt like a mercy that someone else was taking charge. But looking back, I see it differently. She was moving pieces on a board, setting up a game. The rest of us didn't know we were playing. The morning of the funeral, I went to my grandmother's house early. I wanted to be alone with her things, to feel close to her. One more time before everything changed. I used the key she'd given me years ago, the one I'd carried on my keychain, like a talisman, and let myself in through the back door. The kitchen still smelled like her, lavender and vanilla and old books. I stood there for a moment, just breathing it in, trying to memorize it, before it faded away forever. That's when I heard voices, coming from the study upstairs. My aunt's voice, and someone else's. I should have announced myself. I should have called out. But something stopped me. Some instinct. Instead, I moved quietly to the bottom of the stairs and listened. I'm telling you, there's no will, my aunt was saying. I've looked everywhere. She must have died intestate, which means it all goes to probate. And as her children, we divide everything equally. What about Carolyn? That was my uncle's voice. Didn't Mom say? Carolyn is a grandchild. My aunt interrupted, sharp as glass. Grandchildren don't inherit. If the children are still living, that's the law. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought they might hear it. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, you'll understand this part. That moment when you realize the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones planning to take everything from you. I left the house before they could. Come downstairs and find me there. At the funeral, I played my part. I stood beside my mother, accepted condolences, listened to people tell stories about how generous my grandmother had been. And I watched my aunt, really watched her. The way she spoke about our mother and our loss. The way she touched people's arms when she thanked them for coming. Like she was the chief mourner, the center of the tragedy. The way she kept checking her phone, distracted even in her grief. After the burial, everyone came back to my grandmother's house. My aunt had arranged for catering, which seemed excessive for what was supposed to be a small family gathering. But then I realized why she was performing, showing everyone what a devoted daughter she was, how well she was handling everything, how much responsibility she was shouldering alone. I found my mother in my grandmother's bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding one of my grandmother's cardigans. I keep expecting her to walk in, my mother said without looking up. I keep thinking this is just some terrible mistake. I sat down beside her. Mom, did Grandma ever mention anything about a will to you? She looked at me then, and I saw confusion in her eyes. A will, of course she had a will. She was meticulous about those things. She updated it just last year, when she sold the beach house. Where would she have kept it? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. In the safe, I imagine, or with her lawyer. Why? I told her what I'd overheard. That morning, I watched the grief in her face transform into something sharper. Anger. Patricia wouldn't. She said, but her voice wavered. She wouldn't do that. She's my sister. But we both knew she would. We both knew she had. That night, after everyone left, my mother and I stayed behind. My aunt had taken all the keys, said she needed to secure the house. But I still had my copy, the one my grandmother gave me. We went through the study, where I'd heard my aunt that morning. Papers were scattered everywhere, file cabinets hanging open, drawers pulled out and rifled through hastily. It looked like someone had been searching for something, or hiding something. The safe was built into the wall, behind my grandmother's desk, hidden behind a painting of the ocean at sunset. I knew the combination. My grandmother had made me memorize it. Years ago, in case of emergency. Just in case, she'd said. You never know when you might need to know. My hands shook as I turned the dial. Right to 32, left to Nini. Right to 54. My mother's birthday. My birthday. My grandmother's birthday. The lock clicked. The door swung open. The safe was empty. Completely empty. Not even the jewelry my grandmother had kept there. The pearl necklace from her mother. The sapphire ring my grandfather gave her. Nothing. My mother made a sound. Something between a gasp and a sob. She took it all, she whispered. Patricia took everything. We stood there for a long time, staring at that empty safe, trying to process what it meant, the violation of it, the calculated cruelty. The next morning, I called my grandmother's lawyer. His name was Robert Chun, and he'd handled my grandmother's affairs for over 20 years. When I explained who I was, his voice immediately softened, with sympathy. Carolyn, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your grandmother spoke of you often. She was very proud of you. I had to pause to collect myself before I could continue. Mr. Chun, I need to ask you about my grandmother's will. Do you have a copy? Can you tell me what was in it? There was a pause on the other end, a long, weighted silence that made my stomach drop. I'm afraid I can't discuss the contents of the will until it's been properly filed with the probate court, he said. And I could hear the careful, legal language creeping in. However, I can tell you that your grandmother did indeed have a valid will, which I drafted, and which she signed last March. I have the original here in my office. It should have been filed by now. It hasn't been, I said. My aunt says there is no will. Another pause, longer this time. Hi. That's very concerning. Who is handling the estate? My Aunt Patricia claims she is. She says everything will go to probate and be divided among my grandmother's children. That's not correct, Mr. Chun said, and now his voice had an edge to it. Your grandmother appointed me as executor of her estate, not your aunt. And the will makes very specific provisions that differ significantly from intestate succession. Miss Carolini, I think you should come to my office as soon as possible. I went that afternoon. Mr. Chun's office was in an old building downtown, the kind with high ceilings and wooden floors that creaked. He was older than I expected, probably in his 70s, with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent decades watching families tear themselves apart over money. He offered me tea. I accepted, mostly because I needed something to do with my shaking hands. Your grandmother came to see me. In March, he began, settling into the chair across from me with a manila folder. She wanted to update her will. She'd been thinking about it for some time, she said, and recent events had convinced her it was time to make changes. He opened the folder and pulled out a thick document bound with a blue cover. I'll spare you the legal jargon and give you the essential details. Your grandmother's estate is valued at approximately $1.2 million. This includes the house, her savings and investments, and various personal property under the terms of her will. The estate was to be divided very specifically among her heirs. He turned a page. Your mother was to receive 40%. Your uncle was to receive 20%. Your Aunt Patricia was to receive 10%. I did the math quickly in my head. That left 30% unaccounted for. Mr. Chun looked at me over his reading glasses. The remaining 30%, along with all personal jewelry and her collection of first edition books, was left to you, Carolyn. Additionally, she established a trust fund for your future children to be funded with $200,000 from her life insurance policy. The room seemed to tilt. She left me $360,000. More than that when you account for the value of the jewelry and books. The jewelry alone was appraised at over $50,000. Your grandmother was very clear about her intentions. She wanted to ensure you would be financially secure, able to pursue your dreams without the burden she felt she'd carried. I couldn't speak. Tears were streaming down my face, and I didn't even try to stop them. My grandmother had thought of me, had planned for my future, had wanted to give me what she'd never had herself. There's more you should know, Mr. Chun continued gently. Your grandmother included a letter with her will. She asked that I give it to you. After her passing, he handed me an envelope. My name was written on the front, in my grandmother's careful handwriting. I couldn't open it there, not in front of him. I tucked it into my bag like something precious and fragile. "Mr. Chun," I said, trying to compose myself. Why would my aunt say there was no will? Why would she lie about this? His expression darkened. I can't speculate on motivations, but I can tell you that if someone has taken possession of estate assets before the will has been properly filed and executed, that constitutes theft and potentially fraud. It's a serious crime, and it can result in criminal charges, as well as civil liability. I'll be filing this will with the probate court first thing, Monday morning. I'll also be sending a formal notification to all named heirs, informing them of the will's existence and my role as executor. I drove home in a daze. My grandmother had loved me. She had seen me, valued me, wanted to protect me. And my aunt had known this, had known and had deliberately tried to steal it all away. Not just the money. The knowledge that I was loved, that I mattered. When I got home, I finally opened my grandmother's letter. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost tore it. "My dearest Carolyn," it began, in that graceful script I knew so well. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope I've left you with more than just money. I hope I've left you with the knowledge that you were the greatest joy of my later years. Watching you grow into the woman you've become, strong and kind and true, has been my proudest achievement." I had to stop reading. The tears were coming too fast. "I've made certain provisions. In my will," the letter continued, "that I know may cause some discord in the family. Patricia has always struggled with money, with responsibility, with the consequences of her own choices. I've helped her many times over the years, more than the others know. And each time she promised it would be the last time. But it never was. Last year, she came to me, asking for another loan, $50,000, for what she called an investment opportunity. I refused, and when I refused, she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Don't worry, Mom, when you're gone, I'll get what I deserve anyway." My breath caught in my throat. My grandmother had known. She'd known what my aunt was capable of. The letter continued. That's when I knew I needed to protect not just my estate, but you, because Patricia has always been jealous of you, darling, jealous of the relationship you and I had, jealous of your independence, your strength, all the things she could never be. I've left you a significant portion of my estate because I trust you to use it wisely, to build the life you dream of, to be generous to others, the way you've always been generous, with your heart. I know there may be conflict. I know Patricia may fight this. But I need you to stand firm, Carolyn. Esteja firm. And know that this is what I wanted, what I chose. And that no one can take that away from you. The letter ended with, "You are loved beyond measure." Never doubt that. Never let anyone make you doubt that. Be brave, my darling girl. All my love, always, Grandma. I sat on my apartment floor and cried until I had nothing left. Cried for the grandmother I'd lost. Cried for the betrayal I'd uncovered. Cried for the innocence I could never get back. The belief that family would always protect you. On Monday morning, Mr. Chun filed the will with probate court and sent formal notifications to all the heirs. By Monday afternoon, my phone started ringing. First my uncle, then my cousin, then, finally, my aunt. I didn't answer. I let them all go to voicemail. My aunt's message was short and clipped. "Carolyn, we need to talk. There's been a terrible mistake. Call me immediately." I didn't call. Instead, I called my mother. "I just got the notification from the lawyer," she said. Before I could even speak, "Carolyn, did you know about this?" "I found out on Friday," I admitted. I didn't want to say anything until the will was officially filed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I know this must be." "Don't apologize," she interrupted. And to my surprise, she was laughing. Laughing through tears, maybe, but laughing nonetheless. "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. She loved you so much, sweetheart, and she was right to leave you. What she did, you were always more of a daughter to her than I was. I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you. Twinine would be okay. Easy. Not simple. Okay." The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Mr. Chun requested an accounting of all estate assets. My aunt was forced to return everything she'd taken from the safe. The jewelry, the stock certificates, even the cash my grandmother kept for emergencies. It turned out she'd already sold some of the jewelry, the pearl necklace, 2 antique rings. She'd gotten less than half what they were worth, sold them to a pawn shop for quick cash just days after my grandmother died. Mr. Chun filed a formal complaint. The district attorney opened an investigation into possible estate theft and fraud. My aunt hired a lawyer. She tried to contest the will, claiming my grandmother wasn't of sound mind when she wrote it. That I had exercised undue influence over her. But Mr. Chun had anticipated this. He had medical records showing my grandmother's cognitive health. He had statements from witnesses who'd been present when she signed the will. He had the letters she'd written, explicitly explaining her reasoning. The contest was dismissed, and then the settlement talks began. My aunt's lawyer contacted Mr. Chun with a proposal. In exchange for my aunt returning all the stolen property and paying restitution for what she'd sold, we would agree not to press criminal charges. Mr. Chun asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about it. For a long time, part of me wanted to see her prosecuted, wanted her to face real consequences for what she'd done. But another part of me, the part that remembered my grandmother's kindness, her belief in mercy, knew what she would have wanted. Accept the settlement, I told him. Let her keep her freedom. But I never want to see her again. I never want to speak to her. As far as I'm concerned, she's not family anymore. The settlement was finalized in December, 3 months after my grandmother died. My aunt returned what she could, paid for what she couldn't, and disappeared from my life, as completely as if she'd never existed. I got the inheritance my grandmother intended for me. I used part of it to pay off my student loans. Part of it I invested the way my grandmother would have wanted. And part of it I used to start the scholarship fund I'd always dreamed of creating for young women studying literature in my grandmother's name. My mother and I grew closer through all of this. She told me stories about my grandmother I'd never heard, about her strength, her resilience, her quiet rebellion against the limitations the world tried to place on her. And we talked about my aunt, about the sister my mother had lost long before my grandmother died. She was always like this, my mother confessed one evening, over tea in my apartment, even when we were children. Always taking things that weren't hers, always believing she deserved more than everyone else. I kept hoping she would change, that she'd grow up. But some people never do. I think about that conversation a lot now, about how we keep hoping people will change, will become who we need them to be, instead of accepting who they've always shown us they are. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle, or even the betrayal itself. It was that moment in the hallway, that moment when my aunt looked me in the eyes and told me my grandmother never loved me. Because for just a second, just one terrible second, I believed her, and that's what she wanted. Not just to steal my inheritance, but to steal my memories, my certainty, my sense of being loved. I didn't imagine how many people would recognize themselves in that moment. But since then, I've heard from friends acquaintances, even strays, who've shared their own stories of family betrayal. The uncle who forged documents, the sister who emptied accounts, the cousin who contested the will out of pure spite. Money does something to people, or maybe it just reveals what was always there, hidden beneath the surface of family dinners and holiday gatherings. It's been almost a year now. A year since my grandmother died. A year since I discovered what my aunt was capable of. I still think about that day, in Mr. Chun's office, reading my grandmother's letter for the first time, understanding that she'd seen everything, planned for everything, protected me even after she was gone. That's what love is, I think. Not the grand gestures or the emotional declarations, but the quiet preparation, the careful planning, the determination to shield the people you care about from harm, even harm you won't be there to witness. I keep my grandmother's letter in a frame on my desk now. I read it whenever I'm feeling lost or uncertain, or when I start to question whether I deserved what she gave me. And I think about the last time I saw my aunt at the final settlement meeting, when she looked at me with something like hatred in her eyes and said, "You think you've won something, but you haven't. You've lost your family. Was it worth it?" I looked right back at her and said, "I didn't lose my family. I just finally saw who you really were. And yes, it was absolutely worth it. Because here's what I've learned. Family isn't just about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and genuine love. It's about showing up for each other, not just when it's convenient or profitable, but when it's hard. My aunt was never really family, not in the ways that matter. She was just someone who happened to share my bloodline and used that connection to justify her cruelty. My mother asked me recently if I ever think about forgiving her, about reaching out, trying to rebuild some kind of relationship. I told her the truth. Forgiveness isn't about reconciliation. I've forgiven my aunt, in the sense that I don't carry rage or bitterness anymore. I don't wish her harm. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let her back into my life. It doesn't mean I have to pretend the betrayal never happened. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who've shown you they're willing to hurt you for their own gain. I still visit my grandmother's grave every Sunday. I bring flowers, usually the purple irises she loved so much. I sit there and tell her about my week, about the scholarship we awarded in her name, about the book I'm writing, about the small moments of joy that make up a life. And sometimes I tell her about my auntie Hole. She left in our family, about the relationships that fractured when the truth came out. My uncle sided with my aunt initially, believed her version of events. It took months before he saw through her lies. Even now, our relationship is strained, careful. Like we're both walking on broken glass. My cousin, Patricia's daughter, reached out to me last month. She apologized for her mother, said she'd always known there was something wrong, but had been too afraid to acknowledge it. We had coffee, we talked. It was awkward and painful. And necessary, she told me. Her mother refuses to speak about what happened. Insists she was the victim. That I manipulated my grandmother. That the lawyer was corrupt. She's rewritten the entire narrative in her own mind. Turned herself into the hero of a story where she's actually the villain. I think that's the saddest part. Not that she stole from me, but that she can't even acknowledge what she did. She lived the rest of her life in this constructed reality, where everyone wronged her, where she deserved more, where her mother's love should have been expressed through money rather than through all the other ways. My grandmother tried to show her she cared, because my grandmother did love. My aunt, she loved all her children. But she also saw them clearly, saw their strengths and weaknesses. And she knew that giving Patricia a large inheritance wouldn't help her, it would just enable her worst impulses. Her inability to take responsibility, her tendency to burn through money as fast as she could get her hands on it. That was an act of love too, in its way. Tough love. The kind that says I care about you too much to watch you destroy yourself with what I leave behind. But my aunt couldn't see that. All she could see was the money, the number in the will, the way it compared to what I got, what my mother got. She couldn't see the lifetime of second chances my grandmother had already given her, the loans that were never repaid, the bail money, the rent payments, the endless emotional labor of loving someone who never quite loves you back. I've started going to therapy to process all of this. My therapist says I'm grieving multiple losses at once. The loss of my grandmother, the loss of my aunt, or at least the version of her I thought existed. The loss of my innocence, about family, about loyalty, about the people who are supposed to protect you. She's right, some days. The grief is overwhelming. Not for the money, never for the money, but for the trust I lost, the illusions that shattered. But other days, I feel almost grateful that I learned the truth, that I saw my aunt's true nature before she could do even more damage. Grateful that my grandmother loved me enough to plan ahead, to protect me, to leave me not just money, but a message. You are worthy. You are loved. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise. I started the scholarship fund last spring. We gave out 3 awards in the first year, each one for $5,000, to young women studying literature, creative writing, or journalism. The award ceremony was one of the hardest days and one of the best days of my life. I stood at the podium and talked about my grandmother, about her love of books, her belief in education, her conviction that women should have every opportunity to pursue their dreams. And I looked out at those 3 young women, their faces bright with hope and possibility, and I knew my grandmother would have been so proud. My aunt wasn't there, of course, but my mother was, and my uncle, who'd finally come around, who'd finally understood what his sister had done and chosen to stand with truth instead of convenience. And my Kush's daughter, who told me afterwards that she wished she'd had a grandmother like mine. You did, I told her gently. You had the same grandmother. Your mother just never let you get close enough to know her. That's another theft my aunt committed. Not just stealing from me, but stealing from her own daughter, robbing her of the chance to have a real relationship with an extraordinary woman, because she was too consumed by her own jealousy and resentment to allow it. I think about what I would say to my aunt if I ever saw her again. Not that I want to. I don't, but sometimes I imagine running into her at a grocery store, at a restaurant, somewhere unavoidable and public. I used to imagine confronting her, telling her exactly what I thought of her, making her understand the damage she'd done. But now, when I imagine it, I see myself just walking past her, not coldly, not cruelly, just walking past like you would walk past a stranger. Someone who means nothing to you, someone who doesn't deserve even the energy of your anger. Because that's what she is now. A stranger, someone I used to know, someone who used to matter, but who chose to destroy whatever connection we had for the sake of money she didn't even need. My grandmother's house was sold last month. The owners are a young couple with 2 kids. They sent me pictures of the renovations they're planning, asked if I wanted to come by before they started making changes. I went. I walked through those familiar rooms one last time. The kitchen where my grandmother taught me to bake bread. The living room where we'd sit and read together on rainy afternoons. The garden where she grew tomatoes and herbs and those purple irises that smelled like summer. And I realized something. The house was just a house. It was never about the physical space. It was about the woman who lived there, the love she filled it with, the memories we made together. And those no one can take, not my aunt. Chimmy. Not even death. Those belong to me. And they always will. So that's my story. The story of how my aunt tried to steal my inheritance and ended up revealing who she really was. The story of how my grandmother protected me even after she was gone. The story of how I learned that family is a choice as much as it is a biological accident. I don't know if my aunt ever thinks about what she did, if she ever feels regret or shame or anything beyond her own sense of being wronged. I don't know if she lies awake at night thinking about the niece she betrayed, the mother who saw through her, the family she destroyed with her greed. I hope she does, not out of cruelty, but because that kind of self-reflection might be the only thing that could save her from herself. But I suspect she doesn't. I suspect she's moved on, found new grievances to nurse, new people to blame for her own failures, new ways to avoid looking at the choices she's made. And that's okay. She's not my problem anymore. She's not my responsibility. She's just someone who used to be in my life and isn't anymore. And I'm better for her absence. Sometimes people ask me if I'm angry, if higher. The truth is, I don't. I feel sorry for her. In a distant, abstract way. Sorry that she never know what it feels like to be the kind of person people trust, people love, without reservation. People remember with fondness after they're gone. My grandmother left a legacy of love and generosity. What will my aunt leave? A trail of broken relationships, stolen property, and lies. That's the real tragedy. Not what she took from me, but what she took from herself. The chance to be someone worth remembering. I carry my grandmother with me in everything I do now. In the way I try to treat people with kindness and respect. In the way I stand up for myself when someone tries to take advantage. In the way I choose who I let into my inner circle, and how fiercely I protect the people I love. She taught me that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, a commitment, an action you take. Every single day, it's showing up. It's being honest. It's protecting the people who can't protect themselves. It's making the hard decisions that serve someone else's best interests, even when they don't understand it, even when they resent you for it. And she taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you, from situations that drain you, from relationships that make you smaller instead of larger. That's what I did with my aunt. I walked away, not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I finally understood that I deserved better than to spend my life trying to earn love from someone who was never capable of giving it. So here I am, a year later, grieving still, but healing too, building a life my grandmother would be proud of, honoring her memory not just with the scholarship fund or the inheritance, but with the way I choose to live each day, with integrity, with kindness, with the courage to walk away from people who don't deserve a place in my life. Have you ever had to walk away from people who should love you?